Excuse me, we're all set to go? We're all set? Welcome. How are you all? Happy New Year. I'm John Martin, Francine Tishman, Jim Labrie, Matt Rowland, and Maureen Groden. Welcome. We're going to start off with the Pledge of Allegiance. Okay, you are being streamed live, and you're also being recorded for future viewing. So when you come up to the podium, if you have a good side, just lean towards the camera and they'll get that for you. So I know we have a lot of folks here from Hampshire Regional and Norris. We just wanted to have a meeting together so that we can talk about questions and issues that have come up over the past. So we figured this would be the right group to bring up. And I know we have... You can introduce yourselves when you come up, but we have Aaron Kuchar, Chair of the Norris School Committee, Krista, is it Schmitty? Schmitty, hi. Principal at Hampshire Regional, Eliza Puda, Principal at Norris, there you go. Carl Sherleman? Sherleman, you're the Chair of the Hampshire Regional School Committee, correct?
Yes.
And we have Aaron Osborne, Superintendent. Welcome all. So this is going to be, we've got probably a couple small things we want to get off the agenda before we start, if you don't mind. If I can find it in all this paper. On the reports, does anybody from the Select Board have anything they need to report at this meeting before next Tuesday?
No.
Ed, do you have anything?
No, everything I've got can wait till Tuesday night.
Okay.
Just a reminder that I'm not here next Tuesday. I'm out of the...
Yeah, I just wanted to bring two things up because...
town.
Go ahead.
You'll be here?
No, yeah, I'll be here.
Okay. We had a lot of concerns on the Zepka barn roof, and Ed has secured somebody to secure the metal roofing down. So I know that was a project of interest to a lot of people, so Ed's taking care of that. And also, we got a letter offering the right of first refusal for the property on Pomeroy Meadow. So we'll be talking about that more at a future meeting. But those are two good bits of news I wanted to go over. Okay, go ahead.
Our next meeting is when?
And next Tuesday,
The 8th.
January 8th?
8th.
And then, so I guess my question is with regard to the meeting on February. What is it? What did we decide?
The town meeting?
Yeah. Do we need to have, with regard to certifying the articles and looking at them in advance? I'm not sure what the time frame is. Is it 12 days? Do we need to have a meeting? I guess where I'm going with this is, do we need to have a meeting between the 8th and our next meeting, the 22nd, in order to comply with the laws and procedures with regard to the posting of that, and that we've seen the articles?
I'd recommend it. Just it gives us would give
otherwise
us
we'll be late.
a few more days to sign it and get.
Well, I think if we have the
post
meeting
it.
on the 22nd, we'd be late
Right.
by a day.
Right.
Day.
But I would
12 days, right?
14.
Okay.
14 days, 2 weeks.
So we'd be late.
Yeah. So I would suggest that maybe
So
a
the
special
articles
meeting the week before.
wouldn't be ready for next Tuesday then, right?
No, they will not.
No, so we
I mean,
gotta.
they'll be ready in rough draft, but
So how about this?
but not to be
I mean,
signed.
we gotta look at the official articles and right? You
Right.
agree?
Right.
So should we just move the 22nd meeting to somewhere else, or should we still have two?
Why don't we do the 15th?
Yeah.
That's a Tuesday, which is our normal day. And then we can decide on the 15th whether we need the 22nd or not. Keep it on the calendar just in case.
Will everything be ready, Ed, on the 15th?
Or are you worried about that?
That's 2 weeks away.
I mean, at the worst, I would say go to the 17th, but let's go for the 15th.
Okay.
Would,
We have I have another meeting that night on the 17th. And John, you do too, because you're on the same committee.
Right, but we're going to do the 15th.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, all set?
Okay.
Thanks, Matt.
yep, no problem.
Okay.
Oh, not on the
That
22nd
works.
So it's the
now.
15th is the, no, we're keeping the 22nd. We're doing the 15th, and we're gonna discuss on the 15th whether we need the 22nd.
Just put down every week on your calendar,
8th, the
Tuesday be here.
15th, and possibly the 22nd.
Sounds like a
Might-
plan.
Yeah. We might not need the 22nd, but
6 PM? Yep. Okay.
One thing, it's for the people up here. I've gotten a lot of concerns about people at home not being able to hear us.
Yeah.
So we need to be close to the mic. And I reviewed some of the select board meetings today, and it is tough to hear. So if we can stay close to the mic.
Do you think it's a speaking to the mic issue, or are we just having a connection issue?
I think the mics aren't great like we talked about, but when we talk to the new ECAT director, we're going to talk about getting this all upgraded.
Okay.
And the mics are really just for recording, they're not for amplification in the room. So
Right.
we also have to speak up on top of that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, now, Bobby Jones. She's here too. I forgot to mention business manager at Hampshire Regional, so sorry I missed you. Okay, so I think we'd just like to start off by just, and I don't know if it's you, Aaron, or you, Bobby, coming up and just explaining how the Hampshire Regional budget is done during the budget period, just so we can back into that, because I think we'll have a bunch of questions as we go forward. How is it prepared, and how is the input given by all the towns, and what happens to it going through the school committee?
So basically,
You
we
got to
will,
introduce yourself for the
Oh, I'm
record. That's okay.
Bobby Jones, Business Administrator, Hampshire Regional School District. Basically, we just meet together. We've met with department heads and the principal for preliminary work. And then on the January meeting, which is on the 7th for Hampshire Regional, we'll discuss preliminary budget with some numbers, probably not complete numbers, but some numbers. February, we'll have the public preliminary budget hearing, and the school committee will vote on that budget. And then March, we'll have the final budget meeting. And then they will vote on the final budget at that meeting. So any input you want, if you can come to any of the meetings between now, January, February, would be great.
Okay. And I know a question that's come up in the past, the voting, how it's balanced between the towns and how it's averaged out, because it's kind of a quirky formula, at least in my mind. So can you explain that?
So the way that it's assessed out to the towns is it's a 5-year rolling average. It's actually a combination of the state minimum contribution and the 5-year rolling average,
Okay.
which is based on the October 1 counts of each year. And then that's averaged out, and that's how the assessment gets broken out.
Well, that's how the funds are allocated, correct?
Right.
That's what
Correct.
you're talking about?
Yep.
Yeah,
How's
but-
the voting?
Right, backing up until at the
Oh,
Hampshire
the-
Regional School Committee, how is the vote taken, and what town has what percentages, and how is that formulated? I just want to get this so everybody out there understands
Okay,
it.
for the vote of the, okay, it's taken by weighted vote, and I know Aaron actually does that with his sheet. He has all the little numbers that he has to do.
So
and
did he bring those
calculate.
little numbers with him?
Have those numbers, I believe, in aggregate, Southampton
You're g-
members.
Can you, would you mind coming up, Aaron? Yeah, yeah. It's tough to hear on a,
I think it's a set.
Aaron Osborne, Hampshire
Set number, I don't think it
Superintendent. Sorry, I didn't know that was going to be asked for. Southampton members, I believe there are 5 members. They hold five,
Six?
Six.
Six, sorry. They hold a combined 47 point some odd percent of the Hampshire regional vote.
47 point something?
47 point something, I can't tell you. It's based on,
Well, it's 6 votes out of how many,
yep,
I think?
yep.
Out of 14.
47.28% of the overall
47.28.
vote, so close to half.
Now,
Approximately,
that's
huh?
when the committee votes on the
That's where the
budget.
committee votes, yes.
But when it rolls out to the towns, Southampton is one of 5 voting towns.
One of 5 member
So we have
towns.
one vote at that point in time.
You have whatever the regional agreement says. I believe the regional agreement says that each town then votes on it.
Right.
And I think it takes 2 towns to overrule it.
So
Right.
can we, before you go, I'm sorry,
Right.
can we back up? How many are on, because the question was asked, how many are on the Hampshire Regional School Committee?
I'm sorry, there are 6. I
Oh,
apologize.
no, total.
How many? Oh, how many?
18.
18, sorry.
Okay, sorry. Okay, so that gets,
It's 1/3.
Yeah.
right, that gets approved, but 47.28%, that's how it's weighed, yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
Each one is, sorry, the numbers are small. Each member has 7.0 some odd percent.
Okay, and that's per the agreement we did back
Yep,
when?
yep.
Okay, so, there we go. So each town once that budget is passed by just a simple majority of the Hampshire Regional
Yeah,
School
simple
Committee?
majority.
Okay, it goes to each town, they put it on a town meeting,
Mhm.
and 4 out of 5 towns have to pass it in order for it to pass total. And like you were saying, if 2 don't, then it goes back to the Hampshire Regional School Committee
Right,
to relook at it.
right,
And they don't necessarily have to do anything, they just have to relook at it, and it comes up at the town meetings
Right.
again. Is that
right.
accurate? Okay.
Could I clarify something about the voting? When I was in the Hampshire Regional School Committee, there was a member from another town who basically never came to meetings.
Mhm.
And there were times when there were vacancies.
Mhm.
How does that get translated? Do the additional members pick up the vote, or is that 7 point something canceled out?
That vote's canceled out.
Okay.
Okay, so I guess one of the questions going forward is, we had an override last year, and
Mhm.
it only passed by about 100 votes, if I remember correctly, right?
Right.
And we were very adamant about, this is going to be a year that we're going to restart the whole
Right.
process. So as Hampshire Regional goes through their budget process, knowing that we're not going to be recommending that we have any large extra amounts of money that we can fund, how do you anticipate working with us on that?
We're at the moment trying to maintain a level service budget.
Okay,
Kristen is working very diligently with Bobby and her staff, and I'm involved in it, to try to make sure that we keep our service level as close or to exactly what we've had this year.
so level
Going
service, not level funding, which obviously is a.
Right, I mean, I think it's hard to tell anyone this day and age with health insurance increases right now that you're gonna be a level funding.
Okay, no, I don't disagree.
I'd love to try to promise that, but
Yeah, some people, when they hear a level service, they figure the dollar's not
Right.
gonna go up, but there's contractual
Right.
obligations in there. Okay.
And can I just ask about enrollment? It seems to be a changing number. The number I had was 324 in October. Ed had something like 345.
Mhm.
And then I look at what we got on this impact sheet, and it shows we're at 366. Now, I know
what sheet is that?
this Worthington
Oh,
impact.
did you copy that and share it with them? That is 2017 numbers.
But our budget is, we're assessed based on the, right?
You're based on the October 1st numbers. So for,
Am I
so
reading
for this year, for 2017-18, you have 337. For 2018-19, you have 322, I believe is what Kristen just handed me.
Two new numbers for you.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, we got 5.
It's a moving target, but, year to year, based on graduation rates, how many students come up. We have bigger classes, we have smaller classes that come up to the middle high school.
Oh, Bobby, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I just want to clarify that the numbers used to do the assessment are actually based on students that reside in your town that you are fiscally responsible for.
Right.
So
Good point.
it's students that are in the town
Yeah.
that may choice out, they may charter out, but they're included in the count towards the assessment. It does not include school choice in. So what numbers you may see, provided by Kristen or Eliza may differ from the numbers that you're going to see on the assessments.
So if somebody from Southampton, school choice is out to East Hampton, is still counting in the Hampshire regional numbers?
Right, right. So for instance, for Southampton for 20, you have 25 choice out and 8 charter out that will be included in your assessment numbers, along with your resident kids that attend the regional. And so it's just a little different than saying who's actually attending the school. So I just wanted to make that.
So there's,
We as the region fund those costs.
so 10% of the students aren't even there from Southampton.
Right, right.
Okay. So the choice out, we're paying for that, obviously. Does that come out of the Hampshire regional budget?
That's right. Choice and charter out come out of the regional
Okay.
budget.
How does the choice in revenue get billed on the budget? Where does that show up?
That's used on the revenue side so that we use it for the revenue to offset the assessments.
Is that before you do
That's-
the assessment?
Yep, that's
Okay.
before the assessment.
So we're getting charged out, but we're also getting credit in.
Yep,
Okay.
and you see that when you get sent the information, there's 2 different sheets. One is the assessment sheet,
Yep.
which shows all the revenues, and then it breaks down, so you have your total budget less the revenues, and then what's gonna be assessed out.
So on the ones that choice in, they're obviously coming from non-Hampshire regional towns. Is the assessment of that income shared equally among the current regional towns?
Choice, excuse me, choice in does not count towards the assessment. Choice in students do.
It offsets the assessment, right?
It offsets the assessment, right,
But,
through the revenue.
is
but at the high level, before you divide it up amongst the towns, so it just goes on the top
Exactly.
level.
It goes at the top.
Right, the full
Okay,
amount
that's- yeah.
goes before, and then,
Yeah.
So it doesn't depend on any town's assessment, it's taken off the top of the.
exactly,
get-go.
yep.
So it's proportional to the town,
Right,
based
Right.
on.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, because it comes off the top.
Right.
Yep.
okay, that's fair. The other thing, we were talking about budgets, and we may jump over here, but since we're on the budgets, we had, Bobby, you guys may, you folks may want to sit up front here.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Just relax. On the budget now, we see the total line by line item, and we see what Southampton's part of it is. We were requesting if we could have another column added that said percentage, which from our point of view, it looks like just an additional column in say, an Excel spreadsheet.
Now,
Is
is
that-
this, oh, sorry.
That's
excuse me.
okay.
On the monthly reports, are you talking, or the quarterly reports
Yeah.
and the monthly reports? Yeah, no, I had told Ed we'd work together to get that done, but it was impossible to do it for
Right,
this meeting.
okay, so there's no issue with that?
No, not for
Okay.
those reports. It's
Was
not.
there anything else on the reports?
We'd asked for I thought there was, the recent thing that I looked at actually had the percent of where the spending was relative to this part of the year, the one I just looked at for this meeting. But it's hard to look at the numbers without actually seeing the whole. We're only shown a percentage of technology director's position, and it's just really hard to actually really evaluate the budget without having the whole. So that's the column that would be helpful for me to see.
Yeah, we only see the portion that we're responsible for, and we want to see the whole portion.
So of just the central office?
I think of everything.
Of every-
Well, it would just be the central
You have to
office.
divide it up in order to say which piece is Southampton anyway, so it just would be helpful to just see, like, the whole picture as opposed to just our assessment of it.
The entire Hampshire Regional School budget
Right.
breakdown.
Yeah,
Because
it'd be everything, yeah.
Right, because otherwise, I mean, we could
Just
do the
all
math, but
collectively.
that takes a lot of time for us to figure out, what our percentage is, and then extrapolate then what the balance would be.
Yeah, I don't
For
think
everyone
I'm
else.
actually, I don't think I'm clear on what you're requesting. Sorry.
So, for example, the technology director's salary and all the, basically the full budget for Hampshire Regional, when we see the copy of the budget, we see Southampton's percentage of every single line item.
Right.
portion.
We see our
They want to
So
see
we're
the
just
total
looking
line
to have
item.
the whole budget, because I've never seen,
Right, so the only part that's not, that you're only seeing is central office. That's the only one that's apportioned out. The rest of, you see the rest of Hampshire Regional budget, you see the rest of Southampton budget. The only part is the central office salaries that are individual to the individual elementary schools.
Yeah,
not that I've gotten,
Well, we're just looking at these, Bobby.
Yeah.
For instance, the SPED pupil service director,
Yeah.
is that a central office position?
Yep.
Okay.
yeah, it looks like it goes all the way down
Yeah,
to,
that first section is all central office.
Okay,
is all
so that's
central
just the
office.
central office.
Right.
Where does it pick up where we're seeing the whole
Looks-
portion of each
Should be at the
line item
principal.
To me, it
Pick
looks
up around
like
the-
line
Should pick
80
up around the principal.
line
You
84.
have it by Desi chart of accounts,
Principal
right?
central office?
Yeah. There should
Line-
be a 2,200 line item.
Line
20
60
112
on
is
here.
the.
So then the rest of the budget shows basically the full budget, and we have to derive our portion of it. We have to do that
Exactly,
math.
yes.
Right.
Yep.
So if she
Exactly.
puts the percentage on there.
To me, it just would be helpful to have a column that has the full budget throughout, and then a column that has Southampton's assessment.
Right.
It just, for us to be able to evaluate it, it's just, for me, I
Well,
feel like I'm in the
Yeah,
dark.
I see what you're saying now, but part of that to me is if you take, again, go back to where we were talking about the assessments, and you're assessed after the revenues. So it would be kind of hard to relate that, and maybe Aaron can help me figure that one out, but relate
yeah,
it
I
to the
don't-
whole budget, because you're not assessed on the entire
Right.
budget.
I,
You know,
I guess it's also hard to come to this and be standing up here and have to answer what we can do. Is it something you could put into an email and send to
oh, sure,
us?
yeah.
And we can play
Absolutely.
with it and look at what our options are?
Yeah.
It's more than just a 12-second, hey, here's an answer kind of response.
Yeah, no problem at all. I think what they're saying, and I'm going to because you're there, Aaron, it says superintendent salary 49,027. If we had a column, which we're talking about, of percentage of
Oh, I can do that
Southampton,
piece for
we
that
can just
section.
extrapolate that back into it. If somebody really wanted to know, we could
Yep.
just
Because
extrapolate it.
that's also
Okay.
done on a
Yeah.
different
Okay.
assessment,
It's
the
easier.
central office.
I don't need to know right
The
here.
only caution I'd give is how wide, a reporter, if we keep adding things, eventually, so I just want to caution you on that. I've seen some reports get crazy.
I think the easiest way, I'm sorry, is if you just add that percentage,
For that
and the
section.
central office stays at what you have now, and
Yep.
again, if we want to know, we can extrapolate backwards
Sure.
into that. That's
Yeah,
not a big
Yep,
deal.
I got that.
Yeah.
Okay.
But the thing is on that too, just to explain, that's also a little bit different of an assessment. It's based on the same premise of the 5-year rolling average.
Okay.
But instead of being by town, it's actually by school. That's how it has to be done. So Hampshire
maybe,
Regional pays a portion of central, but I can,
yeah,
if
we
you
can email you that information, and you can give us those caveats,
Yep.
and just say, this is how it's
Perfect.
done.
Okay.
I guess it's more explanatory.
I think we're used to looking at revenue and expense reports, so, I mean, we understand that it's helpful just to see the whole picture of expenses. Revenue, we know will be offsetting some of it anyways, so it's just helpful. I feel like we're always looking at not the full picture.
Yeah, we're just trying to get a clearer picture as we go into this budget year, because it's going to be a tough year that we're going to have to say no to a lot of people, I think.
so if you shoot off an email with all your requests,
Yep.
including the monthly report one, that'd be
Sure.
helpful.
Yeah. And you have to get up to the microphone. This is what keeps people from asking questions.
I'm just trying, hi, my name's Kristen Smitty, I'm the principal at Hampshire Regional. I'm also trying to take notes as to what you're looking for, so I think on your budget page, there is a percentage column of how much the budget has been spent out of the
Right.
total line,
Right.
but you're looking for the Southampton's percentage of what that total line is?
Correct.
Share, yes.
So if you have a budget line for, I don't know, principal professional, that's the first one that has the full amount on there.
Yep.
What percentage are we paying in Southampton of that?
I see.
And, it's averaging around 55, I guess, depending on the numbers we use, but it's just, in what percentage of the budget, which is at the last column, it's just easier for us to look at it.
Yeah, I think what Bobby was trying to say is that the assessments total out to be about 9 million, but the Hampshire budget is about 14 million. So Southampton wouldn't be paying 55% total, it would be 55% of the 9 million. So I can understand how that would be
Yeah.
confusing, so I'm just trying to clarify
It's just
what
from
you're
our point of
looking
view, we don't do this full-time, so we don't have the time, so we're trying to make it easy for
I
us, to be honest.
for. Thank you.
I appreciate it. You two aren't going to go away, are you? Come on back.
Try it.
Okay, so the capital and operating costs are shared by that percentage.
Correct.
Say if I use 55% for Southampton, okay. And some folks sent me some questions, so I'm going to, can you tell us how Worthington is intertwined to Hampshire Regional? They have a 3-year contract. I don't think people understand how that works and how it got approved. I know it didn't come before the select boards, and I don't know that it has to, but can you just go over that and how that's working? And if,
Can you say why it wasn't, or was it considered that they joined the regional agreement?
right, that's all part of the question, I guess.
That was never brought up, that they requested to join the regional agreement, so they're not part of it. What they pay for is they tuition in their students, any 7 to 12 students at a higher cost than the regular school choice. Regular school choice is $5,000. They tuition in at $7,500 per student,
Okay.
plus any sped costs that are included there.
So let me ask you a question. First of all, do you know why they left Gateway? Do you know why
They
they?
wanted their own elementary school, and
Okay.
Gateway had closed that school.
Okay, so we're paying on average of, depending on what numbers we use, $14,000 per student, sending them to Hampshire Regional.
Yep.
School choice coming in is $5,000, and Worthington is paying $7,500.
$7,500, plus they pay for their own transportation.
Yeah.
They pay for any out-of-district costs that they
Right.
have for their own students. And,
They're close to half, or a little more than half, so.
So what I've given you and what Ed has handed out is a bit of an assessment of Worthington's real true impact. The 7,500 isn't really the true picture. They actually, based on their incremental special education costs, they actually end up paying about $8,164.89. Now, they also don't pay, they don't have a seat on the school committee, they don't have any, we don't have any legal obligations to them. So, you know, that would be something that would come off the top. They pay, you know, all of their own sort of special education legal. That's where most of our legal costs. We have some costs associated with the school committee. We have no obligation to them for that, so that would kind of come off the top. They pay their own transportation, so we're not obligated to pay any transportation for them. So if you look at the middle section of the Worthington tuition handout I gave you, they also pay all of their own out-of-district tuition. So, you know, we pay about $286,000 that if you were in a similar agreement to Worthington, you would be obligated to pay your share of that. They also pay for all of their own choice and charter out, which Hampshire Regional pays on your behalf. So depending on all of those choice kids we talked about that you are assessed for. So when we look at that, truly the comparable cost per student across Hampshire Regional really is about $9,627.14.
9,627. 9,000.
9,600, sorry.
We would like
You
that
know, so
agreement, yeah.
backing all of those costs out of, say, what you're assessed. So when you look at it, you know, yes, they do still pay a little bit less on average when you figure it out. They also don't have a seat at the table for anything. The numbers we receive, so we have 19 kids. At 6th grade levels, that's about 3 students per grade level. Doesn't change our number of teachers, doesn't change anything for us. It represents $155,000 of offsets to you. You know, I can think of 2 school districts off the top of my head that would pick up this agreement in a heartbeat, probably Mohawk or Central Berkshire. You know, there are other school districts that are absolutely suffering for numbers. You know,
I feel like when it comes to choice, charter, even vocational for that matter, it's actually a positive thing to me that there's school committee representation in town. Like, people have a say in where their money goes. So I don't necessarily see that as an advantage. Like, I'm bothered, you know, like, I support people being whatever school environment that they're going to succeed in. But I also think that I wish the structure was different so that choice, charter, and vocational would actually have school committee representation. So I guess I just don't see that as our advantage.
Right, and I don't know, well, I mean, it's to our advantage in the sense that we call the shots. Worthington has no say in the shots. Worthington loses in that one, quite honestly, I think. We make all curriculum decisions on things like that. And they also do pay a little bit into the central office, which is helpful. It's not a huge amount. They pay about $21,000.
Can I ask about that? Because they didn't have an administrator, I think, in the beginning, right? So they were being mentored by an administrator. So was there a vice principal hired because of the Worthington students coming in? Is that person still in? Was there any administrative staff hired specifically to cover the Worthington additional kids? No. So they were just paying an administrative fee because they didn't have an administrator for their own elementary school, so they were.
In some ways, you have to have a superintendent of record. So, so for the past couple of years, the former superintendent for Hampshire Regional served as their superintendent of record. Also served as their special education director. That was charged an additional amount in the past. They have decided to have a principal / superintendent, at least for the time being right now. You know, this has happened occasionally in other districts around the state. And frequently what happens initially is you do a tuitioning in agreement. Reopening and rebuilding a regional agreement is a long process. It's sort of like a, you know, for lack of a better word, a dating period sometimes. And then at some point a decision might be made as to what to do. I think this was seen as, let's get them over this hump, let's get them through what they're committed to doing in terms of the getting out of Gateway, which is what their goal was, and see where things go from there.
So they're still paying an administrative fee even though they have their own superintendent?
Yes, there are other
For
fees
services.
they pay.
They're paying a fee for services, so in
right.
other words,
Okay.
we
Right.
do some of their business services, like end-of-year report,
Yeah,
some of their grant services,
right.
that sort of thing.
Right.
So they pay a fee for
Yeah.
service. And what happens with that fee for service of 21,000 is that first portion of the budget that you see, which is the central office, when we break out those salaries, we take that 21,000 off and then assess the rest of it to the towns.
So it's just like school choice, it offsets the top number, so the amount you're assessed is reduced.
Yeah, I totally get the importance of school choice and this particular agreement, so I can appreciate that there are a lot of other towns that would actually want to have this agreement. When I was in the school committee, we had over 100 East Hampton kids that school choiced in, and then East Hampton built their own school, and I think it's probably much, much less. But at no point did we like change our letterhead stationery to say 6 towns, 1 school, like, so at what point is this a regional agreement somewhat? You know, like, at what point is, where's the line, I guess?
So if you look at our letterhead now, it says 5 towns, 1 district, and Worthington's kind of been removed for the time being. I think, Worthington's figuring out what they want to be
Okay.
and what they want to do. And the intent was to let them do that. And, in a year, 2 years, they may come back to us and change their minds, and,
It's a 3-year contract, correct?
right now it's a 3-year
So
contract.
they're in their first year?
We're in, we're going through the first year, so we've got 2 more.
Ends in 21.
21.
So are they sending all of their high school students to Hampshire, or are they placing them elsewhere? Because you said they have 19 students?
Their standard is for them to come here, so the bus that picks them up takes them to Hampshire Regional. Now, just like any student at East Hampton, at Hampshire Regional, at Southampton, they can school choice elsewhere. Some students, when they made the move, if they were already at Gateway, they may have chosen to stay at Gateway, stay with their friends, things like that. I believe our numbers are higher now. We have 27 this year, so this is prior year. So this year we have 27, so that revenue is higher.
That's 7 through 12, right?
7 to 12, yes. Yep. They also contribute, another way they contribute is they buy school lunches. They contribute to our school lunch program. School lunch programs are notoriously struggling in this day and age. They contribute athletic fees, as part of being part of the district. So, there are other maybe smaller, subtler ways that I think they help us out. It doesn't hurt to have their numbers on sports teams either. I mean, I think, having a few more members of the various teams is helpful to our competitiveness.
So hopefully down the road, it'll be a good thing for them to come into our system for both sides of it. But is that something you folks are looking at obtaining, if it works for us?
When this agreement comes to an end in 2021, I think we sit down and we ask them what's their intention, what do they want to do, and I think we need to figure it out from there. I don't want to predict what's going to happen.
Assuming we'll have to plan well ahead of that.
Yes.
Especially if we're going to do
yes.
a contract or an SLA or something.
Yeah,
Now,
it's just not been my priority in the first 6 months.
I hear you.
So.
This is our second agreement with them. How many years
Yeah.
prior did we have this relationship? 1, 2?
It began in 20...
7, I think. The end of this contract, I think, will be 7 years.
7 years, yeah.
At the end, in 2021, will be 7.
Yeah, so they've
So
been
they-
4
and
years
they-
prior to this contract.
So 4 years, so a total of 7. And they contribute no capital, obviously, to the
No,
capital
they have
fund.
no
They're not
ownership in
assessed
the
anything
building,
for
no
that.
ownership in anything. Yep.
So you
Yeah.
said 27 students now?
Yep.
So that's about $80,000, at $3,000 difference if they were
Probably,
full
yeah.
members?
Yep.
Okay.
I think it would be a good idea for an assessment to be done. I mean, 7 years is a fairly good amount of time. I think an assessment of the comparisons would be a good thing, not just, what do you want to do, Worthington, but what's in the best interest of the school?
Okay.
That's why I say you might want to sit in the front row.
You keep making me have to
I'm
adjust
sorry.
here.
I think if there were to be a change, towns should weigh in about what they would prefer too. So if the regional agreement were to change, or if the tuition amount were to change, we would need input from towns to make that final decision. So it's not just based on what Worthington wants, it should be what is best for our district.
Well, the
So-
agreement
Well, the
can't
agreement's-
change unless all 5 towns agree to it and get
Correct.
passed at
Right.
a town
Correct.
meeting, so.
Right.
Unanimous, or could it be 4?
No, it's gotta be
It has to be
unanimous.
every one of them.
I guess I'm gonna remind you that, no matter what happens at that point, you have 6 members on the Hampshire Regional School Committee who are elected officials for your town, who carry 47% of the vote.
And I guess that's one of the things that's gonna come up sooner or later, but we have 55% of the students, we have 47% of the vote, and we never have the majority of votes, but yet we pay 55% of all the costs. And that's been a kind of a sticking point with people in Southampton for a lot of years.
So I'm gonna jump into that.
Sure.
So basically what he's saying, but then also with regard, so that's just school committee vote, but then with regard to the authorization and approval of the budget, it requires 2 towns. As opposed, I think that the bar should be much higher on this, in that
Okay.
if one town
Right.
doesn't approve of the budget, then I think it should go back to being looked at. And where I'm coming from on this, I just want to make sure that I'm being clear, is that, and I realize that this would require a rewrite of this, which I think,
That would be a 5-town meeting.
of
and-
course,
yeah,
Right.
okay.
but it's been a long time since this has been looked
Sure.
at. This is an extremely dated contract, which by all contract standards is, I mean, this really needs to be a priority of being looked at. And where I'm coming from on this is that I think that the lifeblood of a town is its public education system. That's my personal opinion. But from the sake of fairness, this select board and the townspeople in this town, have authorization and control over the Norris School. But to a certain degree, given the voting rights and the fact that it requires 2 towns to vote down a Hampshire regional budget, not saying that we want to vote it down every time, but I think that it really should, given that we have one town that is capable of voting down, say, a Norris school budget, I think that one town should be able to vote down a Hampshire regional budget. It's just a fairness thing. And so I feel like what's going on, what can happen in this is that, the individual town schools can suffer because they're not, you're holding
Yeah,
to a different bar.
And I think
And I'm concerned about that.
Sorry, were you gonna say something?
I guess go ahead, yeah, go ahead.
That's it in a nutshell. I think that this agreement is dated. I'd like to see it be held to a higher bar. And I just wondered what you kind of thought about that. And a lot of that is going along with what John says with regard to, Southampton's portion of the payment for the budget. I think that falls in line with, again, another relook of this. And I just think that we owe it to our citizens to be more accountable, because we hold our local school to be as accountable as well.
And historically, we've been like the 5th town to vote at town meeting. And we get to the town meeting, and at that point, we really have.
Done deal.
Yeah, it's a done deal because the other 4 towns,
Yeah.
and the other 4 towns are small, and their percentages can go up or down a little bit, where ours could go up, 6 figures, and we have no control over. So it's something we want to
It's in their
look
best
at.
interest to approve it, because they get all of the benefit with very low of the
Yeah.
cost, whereas we get a ton of benefit as well, but we're shouldering the entire burden. Do you see where I'm going with this?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
No, I don't at all disagree. There are regional agreements where one town can hold it up. It becomes challenging in a different direction, because you have towns that will hold ransom, in
The
situations.
David and Goliath situation,
Yeah, Amherst is struggling with that at the moment. Amherst Regional is struggling with that at the moment, where one very small district holds them hostage on things back and forth, and it's been different districts over the years.
Right.
So that becomes challenging. I guess to some degree, I'm not sure, funding-wise and things like that. I guess that's a separate conversation, funding the elementary versus funding the middle high school. I'm not, the goal is not for that to be mutually exclusive and for it to be a competition between the two.
Sure, but you don't have budget transfer between the 2 of them, so it's kind of like, it's inevitable, right? Like,
Right, of course.
there's a lot of people in town that just think that Hampshire Regional is fully resourced and fully funded, and the Norris School in our town is underfunded and under-resourced. And so, and given that you can't move money between the 2 of them, that's what I'm kind of talking about.
And I don't think, I want to speak for myself, I guess, I don't feel that we need to change the agreement where all of a sudden we're the, 1,000-pound gorilla.
Yeah,
There's got to
of
be
course.
there's got to be some
Checks and balances.
checks and balances in there, because we don't want one town, even if it's us, just saying what goes and what doesn't go.
Okay.
That's not fair.
Yes.
But I think it's our intention to look at working with the other towns and trying to open this up and come to something that's more updated.
I think
Sorry, go ahead.
proportionally, they're all affected, we're all affected.
We're all
I mean,
affected.
it's just, we're on a larger scale, therefore our numbers look higher. But maybe after we have this conversation, maybe we could look at, and maybe perhaps discuss some ways in which we could achieve some kind of savings or some collaboration among even the elementary schools to see how we might share resources, perhaps in a different way that would save everybody money.
Right. And that's the intention of this meeting, to get that going.
Yeah.
Carl, did you want to say something?
Yeah, Carl Schlerman, Hampshire Regional School Committee. I just wanted to comment on the school committee representation of 46% for Southampton.
Right.
I've been on the school committee for 9 years, and the votes have been unanimous, I think, in every 9 years. Maybe you voted against it last year.
He
Okay.
abstained, I remember, I was at that meeting,
I
yeah.
did. One vote.
Yeah.
You guys have an opportunity to strongly affect with your elected officials, and they're not doing it.
Agreed.
So I don't think it's entirely fair to say that you're not being represented or you're being unfairly represented, because you have the opportunity with elected officials to
Yeah,
have
yeah.
a very strong.
I agree. I don't think we're saying we're unfairly represented, we just think that it's an old agreement, and the way it was formed is not, but yeah. So different words maybe that are softer, but yeah.
So, the best vehicle for that is reaching out. I think, I think comparing regional agreements across the state, you might find that many are even more dated. It's a lot of work to update and change the regional agreements. You have to get 5 towns together, and 5 often disparate towns that, can't agree on the color of the sky on any given day to agree on amending a regional agreement. So it's challenging, but I think it's a worthwhile cause. I think it probably could be updated.
Yeah, I mean, the people who put this together had great intentions
Right.
back then. Now I think we need to be more
Times are different.
realistic.
Right.
And I was looking at a May of last year town meeting. I was looking for something, and one of the speakers in there was a woman, was talking about Norris School, saying, we've been doing things the same way for years and years. We need to stop and take a look and do something new and better for our kids. And I don't know what she had in mind. It's just the thought of, we do need to look at what's going on. Are there better ways to do what we're doing? Do it more economically, do it, however. So I think this is opening up that conversation, which,
Did bring, as we're talking about funding, I did bring some comparable funding numbers,
Yep.
maybe to share. Hampshire Regional compares very much academically. I didn't bring academics. Hampshire Regional compares very well academically among the top schools in the region. When you think about the top schools performance-wise in the region, you're thinking about the Long Meadows, Minnechaug's, Amherst Regionals. Hampshire Regional performs on par with every one of those. In terms of type of school and being a regional middle high school, on per student cost, Hampshire Regional is the most efficient. If you look at Hampshire Regional versus Frontier Regional versus Amherst Regional, and I will say that Amherst Regional is an outlier, versus Mahar, and you look at per student costs, what the overall per student costs and expenditures are for Amherst Regional, and then you can look at the municipal K-6s that fall under those 7 to 12 regions, and you can see what the spending is per school. There are towns here that are finding ways to fund both their middle high school, their regional middle high school, and their elementary school. I am not, you can draw your own conclusions from this, but, there's definitely some funding inequities in terms of what's being spent.
and I think one of the things we run into every year, and we don't like to have competition between Hampshire Regional and Norris, but it turns out sometimes that,
Right.
we have people from Norris saying,
Right.
well, we need money, and
Right.
Hampshire Regional gets what they basically want. So putting the
Right.
schools against each other is just not a good thing.
Right,
you know.
I'm not, but I'm saying that
not,
if
yeah.
you looked at the funding among the regional middle high school for Frontier and their member schools,
Yep.
you'll see a little less disparity.
But I mean, if you look at Southampton K-6, we're the lowest there by quite a bit.
A long shot.
By a long shot, yeah.
And we do an excellent
there's-
job with what we have.
There's some reality to that situation.
Yeah,
Frontier, their member towns are funding the regional middle high school to, $400 more per student than we are. And yet, Conway, Deerfield, Sunderland, and Whately are all significantly higher.
But what that doesn't take into
Middle high
effect,
schools are typically a little more expensive.
yeah, it doesn't take teacher salaries, benefits, and all that into, we don't know the disparities
Right.
between those
No,
regions.
I will agree. I don't like per student cost. I like
Right.
percent over net school spending. I'd be happy to bring back a percent
Yeah.
over net school spending if you think that would change things.
Well,
I
just
think
we
that would
do,
be a
I'm
good
gonna-
number to see.
we do a comparison, it's a little dangerous not knowing all the,
I think that's come up before, though, percent over net school spending, so I don't necessarily want to dig into that. Again, it's not to, but funding came up.
Yeah.
And this is funding.
I don't think any of us
These are
will
real
say,
numbers.
yeah, any of us will say we spend too much for Norris School, that's,
Right.
I don't think that's the issue.
Okay.
And I guess I have a question,
Mhm.
since you have all of this data, what's the ratio of, what's the class size, average class size? How do we compare with these other
Could be
regional?
looked up. I don't have average class sizes.
Yeah, I mean,
doubt
there's so
if
much
I
other
doubt
data
if they're
that's behind
spending
this.
more per
There's a lot
student,
more
that they
data
have
that needs
larger
to be had.
classes, though, than you do.
I mean, I'm totally with you on not comparing just per pupil numbers, because
No,
class
I don't
size
believe in
matters,
it. I
like
think
how
it's a
how these schools are due on,
I think it's a terrible metric, but you can go to the DESI website and you can sort schools. They have an Excel spreadsheet by
I've
percent
done
over
some of
net
that.
school spending, and you can sort that list and see where you fall.
And what's
And that's a
included,
better metric. I like percent over net school spending.
okay.
and what staff is included in data like this? Like curriculum directors, are they
This is all staff. This is everything.
all staff, including administrative staff?
It's all in here.
This is all in.
So there's pretty wide differences in,
Yeah. They do their best to create an apples-to-apples metric, but you will see, so for example, Springfield's cost per student is very high because they have very needy students. The expectations of what they need to fund per student is higher. So when you see higher needs, you will see higher cost per student. So I will absolutely say, the state likes to publish this because they like to say that this is an apples-to-apples comparison. I disagree. I think percent over net school spending is a much better metric. Percent over net school spending, your net school spending metric is based on your special education percentages, your ELL numbers, your poverty numbers, all those things that drive cost. So when you look at a Springfield, their cost per student is very high, their percent over net school spending is very low. So you get those differences. What I look for, if I'm looking to sort of evaluate what a school's spending, or whether they're spending an appropriate amount on their schools, I look at both of them. I say, okay, per pupil cost, and then I look at their percent over net school spending. State average net school spending is 22% over the state minimum.
Now, going back to school choice in and out, that's regulated, so we can't increase that to what our normal costs are per student, correct? There's a formula that we have to abide by?
The state mandates it's $5,000 per student, and then there is a formula for additional special education costs. So if you see a number, it's not strictly 5,000 per student. We have some number of special education students that we then charge back the sending town for.
And I'm sure you do.
And the costs vary. There's a whole formula and a whole spreadsheet that's very complicated that we have to do for that.
And just to put it in perspective, according to a report, I get that Krista did at the last meeting, 1 out of every 5 students requires some type of special education service.
Right.
So school choice, we don't have to accept it, we can close down school choice, but I'm assuming when you do the budget process, you're factoring in that $5,000 versus what it really costs us, and you're just adding to the classroom that's already there rather than creating classrooms,
Yes.
correct? And is there some tipping point where you say no more? Okay.
So on an annual basis, the principal recommends numbers to the school committee. The school committee then approves those numbers, usually, I want to say in April, May, somewhere in there. It varies by school. There's a deadline. You notify the state how many seats you have in each class, and then you accept up to that number.
Do we have any say on how many students go out?
No.
Okay, but again, it's at a lower cost, so.
Right.
So if we're reimbursing you 12,000 and they go out for 5,000, that's actually a benefit?
I guess,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, not that we want them to go out, of course, we want them to
Right.
stay in.
Right, and then we get charter kids who are 17, 18,000,
Yeah.
and you're being assessed 12. So, there's a mix.
Yeah.
You're being assessed 12,000 for an out-of-district student that costs us 75,000.
Yeah.
So, if we were to instead just bill back out-of-district costs, you might be a winner, you might be a loser in that.
Yeah, again, I'm
And then
sure
the-
you, through a budget process, you'll calculate all that and figure
Yes.
out. Okay.
Yeah.
How many 12th graders do dual enrollment?
Right now, I think we have about 7.
Oh, that's all?
Now, Maureen, if I can go over, you had a question on Smith Voc?
Not really. We had a presentation, I think, last time. I think what I was having a hard time to do is, I guess in general, I'm just wondering if, I know with Smith Voc, obviously they're seeking a different type of education. And I know when I was in the school committee, they were looking into like a robotics program, and they were looking at other things that might attract students to stay, not just Voc students, but Choice Out, Charter Out.
Yep.
So I'm just wondering if you have looked at the people that are leaving, why they're leaving. Is it because their parents are in another district, or have you actually looked in why people leave?
I have not looked
Yeah.
here at that. In 6 months, I haven't really had a chance to think about that.
Sure.
Yeah, right.
It's a good question.
Mm.
Students often choice out or choice in. A lot of students choice into us. I hear a lot of people in my entry plan I've spoken with who've really very proudly, who know about this district, say it's a hidden gem. Again, we have a regional middle high school whose graduates compare very favorably with some of the schools that we would consider the top schools in Western Mass.
What are those comparisons based at, like standardized testing? What are the metrics?
Well,
there?
college-
Testing,
college
college
enrollment.
placement, enrollments, AP testing. We have a tremendous number of AP testing, I'm sorry, Chris. SAT scores,
Okay, good.
things like that.
Good.
We want to start looking at it across sort of all metrics. I've started to analyze some of the MCAS data because that's the most readily available to me that I can parse through. 98% of our graduates last year were proficient or higher on the ELA MCAS. That's as close as you get to 100%, and there's no such thing as 100% on that test. So, which compares higher than many of the schools I just mentioned. We compare very equally on math. Math is always a little lower. I believe we're at 88%, which is very high on proficient or higher. And again, students also can retake that test. So you have students in that number. You have students who had a crappy day, who didn't eat breakfast that morning, whatever. Your hope is you retest them and they pass. I think one of the badges of honor that Kristen shared with me early on is that she's never had a student not graduate because of MCAS. So at some point, every student has in some way, shape, or form passed the MCAS.
I think primarily here, we're here to talk about the budget, but I
Yeah.
certainly think that, it would be remiss if I didn't say that both schools are incredible schools. My kids had phenomenal experiences, both Norris and Hampshire Regional, and I don't want that to get lost in any of this. So I just
Right.
think it would be a good idea to just look at why people leave.
Yep.
When I've heard about people leaving, it's because their parents work in the school system in another district and they just give them a ride there.
Yep.
I know we have people that are actually at Hampshire Regional whose parents work at Hampshire Regional, so it works both ways. But also, there's a lack of diversity that some people don't like about Hampshire Regional.
Yep.
Those are the only reasons I've heard of why people wouldn't stay, but it would be good to do an assessment of that.
So when I first arrived at Hampshire, I did a survey of school choice students out and in.
Yeah.
And a number of students choiced out because of athletic programs. So programs such as lacrosse and
Yeah.
field hockey are just programs that students get involved with at a young age, and they want to participate in that sport at a high school level that we don't have. And there were just some individualized conflicts that people felt like were problematic for them, and they choiced out. And the number when I arrived was about equal of choice in and choice out, and now we're about, I think, 58 or 68 choice
Right.
out. I don't recall off the top of my head, and we're at 130 choice in.
Yeah.
So that's pretty significant, and I think because we have a strong athletic program, we have a strong arts program, our core program is very strong, but it's all of the additional richness that Hampshire has to offer. We've a lot of AP programs, and we've added programs that attract the kind of Smith Voc type of students, so like a computer science program we recently added, and a new program that we're going to start next year is our AP capstone course, which is going to be something that us and Minnechaga are the only schools in Western Mass that offer that at no additional cost, because our school librarian is going to teach it in addition to running the library at the time. So we're looking at ways to add programs without adding extra costs, because we're really committed to ensuring that we're putting forward a level service budget. But it is time to do another analysis, because the one I did was 8 years ago.
Thank
So
you.
I want to sort of dovetail on the enrichment piece as well. I think Hampshire Regional has done a tremendous job of maintaining enrichment programs. Some of the things, and enrichment activities for students, you know, one of the things I saw when I was first doing a walkthrough that really sold me on Hampshire Regional was, and I say this over and over, and Kristen's going to roll her eyes, but you know, I saw students using power tools in science class, and I thought that's not something that most schools trust middle school kids with, like real 18-volt, Milwaukee power tools, cutoff saws,
Name dropping now. Huh?
circular saws, things like that. They also have, I've been at districts where they have storerooms full of pottery wheels that they're just getting rid of. They've dumped the program, they've eliminated the program. Schools are littered right now with students who don't feel connected to what's going on. They don't feel that sense of ownership. Math isn't for them. They're struggling with seeing the importance of math, but they have that pottery class that lets them use their hands, and they can touch something and build something and make something. Whether it's a vocational school or it's a pottery class, there's a lot of students who really have that need for tactile development. They long for that. And schools more and more are cutting that out. I watch, again, recess being cut. It drives me crazy. That's where most kids learn, spinners or no spinners. How you negotiate that in the kickball playground is really important. It's a lost skill that kids have lost because those things aren't in schools. Enrichment activities and the opportunities for kids to really learn and take some risks sometimes with a power tool, a circular saw, not flinging it around and juggling it, but
You're
learning
brave, yeah.
appropriate use and respect for power tools. But Margaret wanted to.
You have to introduce yourself.
Sorry, Margaret Larson, 9 David, member of the Hampshire Regional School Committee. So I think, you've heard a lot about the enrichment programs that they have at the regional. It doesn't matter how good those are if the students don't know about them who are coming in. So one of the things that I've noticed over the past few years is the effort that the elementary school principals and the high school principal have been doing to, outreach to 6th grade parents, because they don't necessarily know. And we also have the challenge in Williamsburg, for example, where they are geographically closer to Northampton High, and it is just easier for them to go there. And yet we've seen our numbers in Williamsburg increase because of the outreach and the PR and, just talking about it and letting people know what's happening. So, there's 2 parts to that, and I want to make sure that, that they're getting recognized.
Yeah, I don't think anybody would deny that we have great levels of education in both schools, so, and we're doing it sometimes on a very meager budget.
Could I add to the?
Yes, sir.
Carl Schlerman, Hampshire Regional. Can I add to the school choice discussion in that there's a dropping demographic in Western Massachusetts. There are fewer and fewer kids in our schools. I think Berkshire County dropped 20% in enrollment, huge numbers. I'm not sure what our percentages are here, but we're down, 10 or 15% at least. So we have been using school choice kids to keep our infrastructure whole and not start carving out chunks of school and closing it down, because you can't offer the education we offer is based on what we have and the people we have doing it. We walk a really fine line if you start cutting your budget and suddenly we start losing. People look to the best school they can find, basically, and that's I guess, one good thing about choice. And so they're coming to our school because it's a really good school. And it's benefiting us. We're getting almost $1 million a year that you're not paying because we have these kids filling the seats in our school. if we make rash decisions and suddenly start cutting budgets, those kids are gonna say, hey, this place isn't good anymore, they're gonna go somewhere else. And not only are we gonna lose those kids, it's gonna be this cascading effect. And so we walk a really fine line, and I'm not holding it against anyone, but it's just a reality that we work with every day when we're trying to make decisions. And the other thing I want to point out is that there are schools that are just getting hammered, Springfield, Holyoke, and it's a little bit parasitic. I mean, we're surviving at their expense, honestly. And this is a huge issue with state funding, and it's way beyond what we can do anything about in the school committee, but I think you as towns have to start talking to state representatives and saying, this is not sustainable. I mean, we've hit a wall. You know the state funding has been flat for what, 15,
It's
20
actually
years?
gone down, but yeah.
Yeah. And costs keep going up, and it's all property tax, and that's why we're here,
Right,
because everyone's
right.
screaming.
And that's why one of our members of the Hampshire Regional abstained from the budget, because the state is not pulling their weight.
Yes.
And the scenario you just mentioned around school choice is the reality at Norris School. And that's the other thing that we have to be concerned about, not just at Hampshire Regional, but also the impact of the cutting of services at our local elementary schools.
Yeah,
So-
and just to, jump on with you here, like, I don't think anybody up here is wanting to cut any school budget for the reasons that you've outlined. It's more about just having an overall discussion with regard to that, about fairness and equitability across a
That's fine.
regional agreement.
I just want
when
you to
we have to
understand
balance the
balancing
demands
act.
of a local school
Yeah.
that we, for lack of a better way to put it, have 100% of control over versus a regional school that we don't. And I'm not advocating that we do
Yeah.
have 100% of control over that, but it's a different dynamic. And I think that, like, fairness is really what we really want to dig into, and to try to make them equitable
Yeah.
as much as possible in terms of everything.
Well, I would just encourage you to hammer on the state more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have
And one of
Lindsay Sabadosa is coming to our meeting Monday, and we're gonna certainly give her the same line.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, okay, welcome to reality here, we need help.
That might be a good thing to bring Lindsay here.
She's absolutely for
Well,
it.
Yeah, I think she'll,
I hope to see her tomorrow, and that was one of the things I wanted to raise. What can we do? I mean, not just Southampton, but all the member school districts and representatives to start to get
United.
better support from the state, because if we're looking at $12,000 a student and they're giving us $5,000 for school choice, I mean, I know it's a buffer, it saves in some respects if it doesn't add to cost, but nonetheless, it's still substantially less than what it really is
Yeah.
costing us.
Yeah, I mean, I think that $5,000 number came about around 1999, and.
So it's
And
$6,000
we keep
now.
hitting the same topic of
C-
very big
CPI has
items,
gone up,
like
the
we're talking
ability,
So
yeah.
15, 20 years of nothing
Right.
being looked at.
Right, the value of that money is half of what it used to be, quite
Mhm.
honestly.
Yeah. and
Very true.
I think our dilemma during the budget process is people say, well, we got to fund Norris, we got to fund Hampshire, we got to fund
Right.
the police, we got to fund the fire. And we have people saying, do we really need a full-time fire department? Do we really need a full-time police? Do we really, I mean, boy, we need them all, because some people say they come to town because they have a great school. But from my point of view, if you got a great school, you have lousy police, lousy fire, people aren't coming to town. So it's everybody together looking at how the town runs, I think. So we've got to balance that, which is getting tougher and tougher. So we're just asking, as you look through the budget,
Right.
to try to keep a fine eye
Yep.
on that. And we want to continue the discussions as we go along.
Right, and we're really not adding things, and I think, a couple things we're looking at is ways to save. I know Kristen is looking at, we spend a tremendous amount of money in out-of-district transportation, so we spend a lot of money on tuition, but then we also have to transport those students. On tuition, we do get a little money back in circuit breaker. We don't get any money back on transportation, and so we end up paying companies like Vanpool, which are great resources, but they're expensive. They're very expensive. Kristen has found that if she can consolidate a few students and provide some support to the elementary schools, I think we're transporting some Norris students via Hampshire Regional's van at less than half the cost that Vanpool was charging.
And you've been doing that for a couple
And I
of
think
years.
Yeah, first year, right.
Right. I think one of the items that Kristen might have on the budget this year is for a new van, maybe, and driver, maybe next year.
Well, I haven't talked
We
to
might
school committee
see.
about it yet, so.
Right, shh.
But
Sorry.
transportation's a perfect example of the
No, but
state not coming
It's
through.
realistic that we need to think about these things. We may bring up the potential for getting another van and outlaying, you know, 30,000 for a van plus the salary first year, but then saving $50,000 a year every year going forward.
I guess that'd be great as long as that $50,000 savings comes off the budget so that
The
we
first
see
year.
that and spread it along.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Right, so Erin brings up a good point. So we're in our first year of having our van driver take routes, and I know that one student is transported from Southampton to Westfield. Next year, we did a projection of what our out-of-district, just our transportation is, and this is per student. So one student would be $17,860. One student, just transportation for the year, $27,000, $20,900, $18,525, $20,900. So it's about
it's just-
$100,000
Yeah.
to transport
Right.
these 5 students.
And we're only transporting the young man to Westfield because he got accepted into,
Correct.
was aeronautics or?
Correct.
Yeah, and we went through that process, so,
Right,
yeah. But if
And-
he was going for something that Smith had, we wouldn't be paying for transportation.
correct.
Okay.
And I know there are other transportation routes right now between Hampshire and the Norris School that if we had the opportunity to have another van driver, Eliza and I were just talking about a student who needs transportation, and because there's not availability with our current van, it's a cost that needs to go to Vanpool, which has these like astronomical figures of transportation. So, and I know that in her request, she's hoping for a reading teacher, but that reading teacher would pay for a program that would bring students back in district. So these out-of-district costs are astronomical. So we're hoping that if we build some internal structures, we can defray that cost. And as Matt said, if we start sharing costs, that's where the big savings is going to come in.
And I think those are the creative ideas that we're looking for.
Yes,
I
Right.
mean,
it's definitely what we're
never
looking
mind, we
for.
never transport it. You're saying, why don't we get a van and we'll save money? I mean, that's a
Exactly.
great idea. Yeah.
There's another cost-saving measure that our Director of Student Activities, John Plord, is piloting this year. So right now what we're doing is we're paying for athletic transportation to games and home from games, because coaches like to talk kids up and then process after the game. However, if we only transport students to games and then for students to get a ride home from their families, or we could take one of our vans to the athletic event and transport any student home with our van and not use our transportation company, that's another $30,000 that we could save. So we truly are like looking at different opportunities to save money, and we're trying to pilot all of these things so we can present to you what it would look like and have a reduction in the budget, because I do agree that if we're gonna have a savings, it should be a
Yeah.
negative number.
And I know when my son was playing sports, we'd go to every game.
Yeah.
And if another parent wasn't there, you'd bring Joe or
course.
Tom back with you, you know?
And oftentimes drive through your town to go to the school to pick up your student, so
Right.
that's silly now, so we're just trying to figure it out.
Good idea.
And it would be a good idea if everybody in the room wrote, because the state did promise regional transportation funding of 100%. And I think we're at, what, 60%
Yeah.
now?
65, yeah.
65%. So they haven't come through, and it's cost us over the years thousands and thousands of dollars.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, hundreds.
No, there are a lot of, you know, and coming into education and things like that from, you know, I came from outside, and I feel like there are a lot of penny wise, pound foolish decisions that get made, based largely on budget. You know, right now, we're looking at 2 out-of-district students, you know, who we don't have a choice in. At some point, becomes a legal matter, and we are legally obligated to educate them. And for lack of a reading specialist,
Providing the service, yeah, and
at,
for the
you know,
cost
at
of
Norris
both
to
of those,
provide them with that
it
service,
pays for that specialist.
we're gonna spend $60,000 a student for tuition plus transportation.
Yeah.
So we're looking at $150,000 for lack of a teacher. And at some point, I guarantee the school had a reading specialist, and times were good, and you didn't have quite as many students, and instead of trying to double up and keep things, and budgets got tight, and someone said, cut the reading specialist. So they got the reading specialist, and lo and behold, now we're having reading issues creep up and creep up and creep up. It happens all the time. So you're gonna make that decision, because I have to cut something out of the budget, and I can't cut a second grade teacher, I can't cut a math teacher. This is a teacher this is a specialist teacher. I'm gonna cut them because I think I can absorb those kids in the classroom. And for 5 years, it works.
yeah.
It works for 5 years. And then you get hit. Those students creep up from kindergarten to first grade to second grade to third grade. They can't read. and you've got an advocate in your office, and you're arguing with your advocate about your inability to provide reading services to them, and they're threatening to go to the Bureau of Special Ed Appeals, where you know you're going to lose, and you're going to look at that as replacement. I mean, that's...
There again, if you have a plan and show us the return on the
Yeah,
investment.
that's,
You get a teacher, it'll save us from going out, or, I think that's a great idea. There's nothing
Right,
nothing
right.
wrong with
And
that.
so that, you know, that
the point is,
teacher,
you're not gonna pull those students
not
back
gonna pull
likely,
those
but
two
you're gonna
kids back.
prevent more from going, and it sounds
Right.
like your
Yeah.
reasoning there is for
Right.
every 2 students gone, you've more
Right.
than, you've
Right.
more than paid.
right, once a kid's gone, your chance of getting them back is incredibly small. You know, what we're looking at is we've probably got a few kids who might be 75% of the way there. We've got some more kids that are maybe 50%. We might lose some of the kids who are 75%. We might just lose them. But the 50% kids, can we bring them back?
Yeah.
And it's not going to save us immediately, but it's gonna be a one-time investment that's gonna plug that hole in the roof, and the roof's not gonna get worse.
Yeah.
And, you know,
Believe that.
and or we're gonna reshingle the roof even, and, you know, keep
Are
it
you,
from...
are you
from
able
long
to
term.
identify any services that would meet the needs of our, I'm talking about Norris now,
Mhm.
of students we have in Norris that would also attract more out-of-district students, to create a program that more or less paid for itself because it would
Right.
be unique?
Well, I mean, something like that clearly is
Right.
that's a revenue
That was-
producer in my
that's
mind. I
fine.
mean, it's on the
So
cost
there,
side
there
of
is
things,
the
but-
ability, if you have a good program and it's well-developed, you can take in students. So we said that, you know, those 2 students are about 60,000 each. If we had a teacher in that school and we offered other schools 24,000, you suppose they might take it? You know, and I don't know, we have, you know, amounts that we can charge by law.
Sure.
We can't, I'm just throwing an
But, yeah.
arbitrary number out there. But if we gave them a proportional share cost of putting those kids in the classroom, there might be an opportunity to take some revenue. I'm not
Yeah, no,
guaranteeing
no,
it's
I
gonna
get it.
happen. The other thing we can do is we can also have, you know, inter-school agreements throughout Hampshire Regional. I think that's another item we need to look more at, and creating, you know, I know everybody wants a central office you can drown in a bathtub, but there are some positions that maybe we need to think about on the regional level, because no one school can support them. You know, a behaviorist, an ELL teacher. We are struggling mightily, and we've been struggling mightily to find an ELL teacher for 2 of our schools. You know, there's some things that, you know, having a regional resource for that might help. We're not there yet where we're saying, okay, let's add a bunch of positions to our central office, but we're having those conversations and we're saying, what makes sense to think about? We've talked about a couple different positions. They didn't necessarily sail, but we're gonna keep at it. We're gonna keep, you know, maybe we're beating our head against a post, but maybe at some point the post is gonna crack. You know, our heads might be harder than the post, I don't know.
Do some
So we're gonna
positions
keep looking
travel?
at it.
Sorry, do some positions travel so you can?
Yes.
Okay.
We do have some shared positions. This year, we have 2 schools that have .2, so 1 day a week need for a school psychologist. Those 2 combined to a .4, and we actually found a really good school psychologist who is a retiree who just wanted a little more time. I do think we have 2 of our schools needed combined .7 ELL. I think they finally just found that after like 6 months of looking. Occupational therapists are notorious for being part used, and we've got a few that are shared, things like that. And you know, we want to look at how we can do that in a productive way and utilize the resources we have.
Yep, great.
So there's we think there's opportunity there. I can't promise it's going to happen tomorrow, but I think over the next few years, hopefully, you know, we're going to be able to present to the town some opportunities that we've addressed.
So getting back to what you said earlier twice, you've only been here 6 months?
What's that?
You've only been here 6 months?
I've been here a whole 6 months now. Yeah, actually, I just got an email saying that, from some organization saying, congratulations, you've been 6 months.
Oh, wait,
Like
there's-
LinkedIn or
So
something.
you've had a heck of a 6 months.
Yeah.
You've had a heck of a 6 months.
It's been a fun 6 months, yes. I wouldn't want it any other way, quite honestly. I mean, I have to say, I love the region. It's grown on me spectacularly. And I mean, I have to say, the walkthroughs I did initially blew me away in terms of what's going on, what the kids are doing. Your students are fantastic. I enjoy them every day. Come check out my Facebook page. There's a little plug for my Facebook page. I like to post pictures of visits. I like to do bus duty, things like that. And the principals entertain me and humor me when I want to play bus duty. It's great. So,
Speaking
yeah.
of that, Aliza or Aaron, I'm looking at Aliza and Aaron. Do you folks want to say something?
Just
Represent
wanted to-
Norris. How are you?
Good, how are you? I can just
Got to
follow up
introduce
with
yourself, sorry.
Aliza Pluta, Norris School, I live in Holyoke. Just follow up on what Aaron was talking about with a language-based classroom in order to keep those tuitions back at the school rather than tuitioning out. And I know that I did submit to you a paper that kind of outlines all of that, if you got it by email the other day. Things pop up, we have a student who's not even at our school yet, and would attend preschool. We own the children of Southampton at the beginning at age 3. And when someone has a disability at the age of 3, it has to be tuitioned out because we cannot service that child at our school. We are responsible. So it starts at age 3. Over the years, I've tried to put into my budget a way to support all students so that we have a tiered system of support for our students. And so that we look at the whole class and then we assess the students, and then based on the assessments, we differentiate instruction for students. Well, when it's one teacher and 20 kids in a classroom, you can't do it effectively. So we need to provide interventionists. Well, I didn't have interventionists because I could never increase my budget in order to have those intervention teachers, right? So the language-based issues continue to grow, and then by the time kids get it, we're seeing it like in 4th and 5th grade where we've met, we've re-met, we've tried, we've differentiated their programming as best as we can, and then we get to a point where I'm sitting in front of an advocate like Aaron said, and I know deep in my gut that if this were my child, I can't say no. How can I say no? Because we can only piecemeal their program so much. So now we're taking them out of music class to get reading, and we're taking them out of library to get reading, and we're taking them before school for reading, and we're spending money after school on reading. And then all of a sudden this child's program looks completely different than everybody else's, so it doesn't make any sense. And so trying to implement a language-based program, and like you said, we may be able to get some money out of that, right? But at the same time, I was talking to one of my special ed teachers last year, and it's almost like if you build it, they will come. If we started a language-based program last year, within 2 months it'd be full. So there are kids that are at that 75% already, where we know, we're trying to hang on to them as long as we can. And we do see sometimes kids leave to go to White Oak or Curtis Blake or these other places for 5th and 6th grade, and then they go back to the high school for 7th. And what can they do there that we can't do at Norris? And I get it, it's totally different, but if you see the difference in per pupil expenditures, that's part of where it is. I don't have all these extras. I've been level funded or level service. I get confused. I know what they are, but when I'm standing up here talking, it's a little difficult. I appreciate that everybody voted for the override and it kept me whole, and that's fantastic. But when I go back, we lost 2 teachers and had the specialist teachers went to part-time 4 years ago. Specialist teachers were able to come back to full-time because of, I think, certified free cash in the fall. We were able to bring 1 teacher back. We're still down that 1 teacher.
Yep.
So I'm still
From a while
trying
ago.
to recoup
Right.
from then. Our enrollment has gone down, that is true. And sometimes I say to the teachers, because I have to wear both hats, I have to be the fiscally responsible one, and I also have to play the devil sometimes, and I say to teachers, well, our enrollment is down, so I can't really ask for more teachers because the amount of kids that we left looks like we could have lost 2 teachers, but we already lost 1. But they need to be different. I don't need another classroom teacher, right? Our class size isn't that high. It's not enormous. It's good, but I can't do anything special. And when I mean special, I don't mean teach Spanish. I mean differentiate instruction for students who need it. Give them the support that they need. Meet them where they're at. So that's what I'm talking about when I'm asking for more money in my budget in order to support those students.
Okay. And obviously, as you're working on the budget process,
We are working on it now. Yep, we've had a couple discussions. Our math program is 5 years old. The whole district is looking at a new math program. Also, we don't what we do for ELA at Norris School is a readers, writers workshop. And with $5,000 in my budget for professional development every year, that is not enough money to continually professionally develop teachers in order to be really great reading teachers. They do a great job. We don't have a curriculum map, scope and sequence. We don't have a reading program. We do a system of reading, so that's what we do. I feel like it's falling short. I think, we need to look at something else. My teachers are saying it, I agree with them, but looking at a reading program costs a lot of money. So not only do we need a reading program or some other way of doing reading, we also would need someone to oversee that. So when I have a reading specialist person come to do professional development, it's one and done. They come in, I only have enough money to pay them to come for the day. I might file the teachers into the conference room to do some learning for 2 hours at a time, grade 2, and then 2 hours for grade 3, and then the next day. That costs a lot. It's over $1,000 a day for these people to come. But then there's no follow-up. I can follow up, I can go into the classroom, but I have all these other things to do as well. I'm not an ELA coach or a math coach, so I also put that in there. And I realize this is a lot, this is a lot, but this is what would make Norris really great, and put us to where we should be, rather than just, stringing along every year trying to do what we can do. I mean, one thing that I did last year was a regular classroom teacher retired. And instead of hiring another regular classroom teacher, I looked at the numbers, and I hired a special ed teacher. So, I do look at those things. I don't just, think, well, one's leaving and one's coming, and I'm not going to tell anybody or whatever. I really looked at the numbers to say, well, what do we need? And we had, in our special ed programs, at each special ed teacher was taking about 2 grade levels at a time, and there were 6 kids in a reading group. You can't do specialized reading instruction with a reading group with 6 kids if they're all reading at different reading levels. So we were able to get closer to what they need in that respect.
Now, on training, where I work, we do a lot of training. We used to send everybody to Boston, get trained in certain aspects, but then we decided we're just going to do a WebEx.
Oh, okay.
And
Yep.
so we can have 10 people sitting in my location, 10 Lowell, 10 Boston, 10 Dartmouth, and
Yeah.
it costs us next to nothing. Is there a way to train teachers like that, get other schools?
Yep,
on
we've
board?
done some online training as well, and it doesn't cost as much. So with some of the programs that we've purchased over the years, it does come with a certain amount of time for training.
Right.
So you might get a 2-hour training that's embedded in the cost that you already purchased the materials with, but it's more of, ongoing. A teacher can't just watch something for 2 hours and then become an expert in the classroom.
Agreed.
The follow-up has to be there, the check-in has to be there, their questions need to be answered, and it all costs money and time. And when teachers are out of the classroom, I have to pay subs to be in the classroom, so that's another cost that I have to, look at the subline to find out how am I gonna do this during the school day or during our half-day professional development. Yeah.
I mean, I hope everybody is, I just want to point out a summary of this, and thank you for that, but like what is entering my head right now is that we have a tale of 2 different schools that our children are responsible for. We have 2 schools that are unbelievably efficient, that are doing an unbelievable job educating our students. I don't think either school, I mean, it's clear that your school is very underfunded and under-resourced, and Hampshire Regional, I think, is right-sized. And so, meaning it's running very efficiently, it's doing an excellent job. It has just what it needs, and is doing great. But then we have another school that we're also responsible for, and it's clear that you have a tremendous amount of needs. And so this is the reason for all of this, right? I mean, this is why we're here, and it's not to try to even out money. It's to try to make sure that we're sending the right message to our townspeople that we have a problem, and we're at a breaking point. I mean, if you just look at the history of our town over the last few years, we're trying to pass override after override every other year, and it's just unsustainable, right? And so, and Aaron, to your point, I know that this isn't going to happen overnight, but what we're trying to do up here, I think, and I don't want to speak for all of us, but I'll speak for myself, is that we're just trying to send the sense of urgency that we are doing everything we can as a town to preserve the services that we have, and I'm getting super passionate about this, but this is education, police, fire, ambulance, highway, we are at a breaking point. I'm not trying to be doomsday, but like, you can just see it in the history of this. And we need to do a better job across all aspects, and we're asking this of every town department, not just yours, but we have to think creatively. I understand, and I think, you know, you brought up a good example of how, you know, a resource teacher would prevent students from leaving, which in turn would have an ROI associated with it. And I think we need to look at more of those things, especially some cost-cutting things as well, to be able to make these schools more equitable, really. Like, that they're both right-sized, right? And so I'm not a magician, and I don't know how to do that, but at this point, we need to make sure that we're sending the sense of urgency on this, because at the end of the day, I think none of us want to start eliminating and cutting. That's not the answer.
Nor
It really
are we
isn't.
going to be in the position of being able to support an override. I mean, we had like 20 years of not having an override, and
It's
it
just
was
not
on
gonna
the part
happen.
of a tremendous amount of people that it actually got passed last
Yeah.
time around, and thank goodness for that, saving 6
I know.
teachers, the local
Yeah.
level and stuff. We're not going to be able to be in that boat next year.
Right.
And then it just comes as hard things, and then you're chasing your tail, and then you're doing the wrong thing, to Aaron's point, which is that the answer is not to cuts. You just then it's penny wise, pound foolish,
Right.
and we're in a deeper problem than we otherwise need to be. So we have to think about this together.
I mean, you know, when you look at Norris, and it's a fantastic school, and I don't, you know, I don't want to sound negative in
You're
any
not.
way, you
You're
know?
not.
We have amazing teachers that do amazing things, and people are so happy, right? They do these creative, awesome projects. They collaborate with outside authors and storytellers, and they present to parents, and parents love it, and it's great, and it really is great. So people are satisfied with how much money they're spending for what they're getting, right? I totally get that. But when you dive deeper into what's happening, when your child is having trouble reading in first grade, so they go to someone to help them read, and then your child is still having trouble reading in second grade, and they go to someone to help them read, then we don't have enough resources for them to get what they need, and then they become a special ed student, you know? And that's a really elementary explanation of what's
No,
happening.
but it's not, because then
And our
that ends up
spend
costing
rate
us
should
more
not be
money down the line.
20%. 20% of our kids should not be in special
Yeah,
education.
I was shocked at that number.
Yeah.
1 in 5.
Because there's nowhere else to go. So, you know, that's basically, anyway.
Erin Kuchar, I just quickly wanted to talk about what we've been absorbing internally capital-wise. So I also just want to put out there that some of the big stuff that's been happening to the school infrastructure, we have had to, this year, have had to work with and have had to come into our own budget and figure out how to find the money in this really, really tiny, tiny budget that doesn't have any room for wiggle. So, I mean, we spent a lot of money. We have a lot of items that still need to be looked at. And so we try everything we can. We do every patch we can do. We do every, you know, we have a phenomenal head custodian, and, you know, we do everything we can do. But we're just, it's an old structure. I mean, my husband went to school there. It's an old structure. So it's, you know, we have to really, we work with everything we have. We have great resources at our school, but we're just at this point, kind of like what you're saying, where things are just crumbling everywhere, internally underneath, and then the infrastructure itself. And so I just want to be clear about some of that.
I think,
Yeah,
Francine,
yeah,
that's what you
you
have.
put forward, I'm not sure who prepared this, but I think it's worth mentioning the capital, what you're referring to, the capital committee
Yep.
Yep.
of infrastructure needs of Norris School. I think it's important for people to hear that, so.
Oh, so, what we refer to capital committee is the fire alarm system needs to be replaced. It's antiquated. If it goes, it won't work, and our school will be shut down. That was from the inspection report in August. That's about $28,498. The sinks in the grade 5-6 wing, which were shut down because of the water inspection last year, need to be replaced, and in order to do that, you have to add, here's where I
Hot
might
water.
need Tom. Well, you have to add hot water, and originally we thought we had to add hot water, but there's a way to do it, which is like, come on up, Tom.
I'll let you guys talk
Where the
capital.
cost would only be $9,000.
Tom Labelli, head custodian.
How you doing?
Hi, Tom.
Jim. The sinks themselves aren't being replaced. It's literally just the fixtures. It's the fixtures for the hot and cold water. And when I say hot and cold water, since the school was built, or the addition was put on, none of the sinks have been connected to hot water. By code, according to the building inspector, we have to have the hot water connected. The original estimate, I think, was at like $24,000 to bring hot water from the source to the sinks. But then, after talking to some of the plumbers in town, a quicker and less expensive fix is to put actual hot water, tankless hot water heaters, electric hot water heaters underneath the sinks, bringing the price down to about, it was about $7,500 plus about another $1,600 for an electrical hookup to hook up those sinks. And then all the sinks would have running hot and cold water. And then there's a flushing program that the state has to eliminate the lead and high lead and high copper content in the system. And simply what that means is every morning the teachers would come in, they would run their water for about 2 minutes. They would record the time that they do it. And then you can go to a website where they would record this. And then after a period, I believe it's like 2 months, the state comes in, they check the water for lead and copper content. And if they see decreased numbers going down over a period of, I believe, 6 months, and don't hold me to the exact numbers, but it's a period that they would test it. And if it goes down and stays down, then we would be back to our regular, I think, twice a year water testing for lead and copper content. So it's something that should be done according to the building inspector, according to the plumbing inspector, in order for us to pass code, but they've been kind enough to sign off on the occupancy for the school.
But
The carpeting upstairs.
the fire alarm system is
Yeah.
more of
It's
an issue.
critical.
I
The
would
fire
think.
alarm system is a safety issue, and simply said, John Workman said, if you can't have parts for that readily available, the school will be shut down.
Yeah.
And I contacted, Grinnell?
Yeah.
Tyco Grinnell came and they did the inspection. They originally told me that, oh, this thing is, we have a lot of these in this school system. There's parts that are available. And then I said, would you be willing to, or I was asked to ask him, would you be willing to put that in writing, that parts are available for this system in case it fails? He goes, well, no, we can't do that. We don't service it. Lee Audio is the one that services it, and I went to Lee Audio, and they do not have readily available parts for that alarm system if it were to fail.
Okay.
So they recommended getting an upgrade to a new system.
So you brought
So it
that
works.
before the capital
No.
committee?
That
Yeah.
has been, yes, referred to
Okay.
capital committee.
Yeah, I know going into the new fiscal
now,
year, we have
right.
roughly $300,000 in free cash certified, correct, Ed? 304, something like that? 305,000, but that's not to be used for expenses, but, capital issues. We can talk about that.
Then the carpeting on the second floor, which is original to the addition, is buckling like it was in the library, especially when
You
it's
talking hallways or classrooms, or?
classrooms.
In all the classrooms upstairs on the second floor, it buckles literally between 2 and 3 inches. And when it gets hot and humid, it shrinks.
Yep.
Or actually, I think it
Expands.
expands.
Yes.
probably.
And then when
And
it's
then in the
cold, it
winter,
shrinks.
when it gets, you turn the heat on, it dries out again.
Did we get a cost on that, replacing that, or?
We have several quotes, from 25 to 47,000, and so we just went right in the middle at
Yeah.
36.
So will we put carpet back, or just do tile, so we'd be done with
They
it?
would put not tiles, but carpet tiles.
Carpet tile?
Similar to the library, right?
Similar to the library, you spill, you can pick one up.
Yeah.
So you can just
Yeah, you
replace
replace
individual
that, yeah.
ones if you have to.
The expense comes not in just, it sounds like a lot for carpet, but they have to tear it all up, they have to scrape all the glue off, they have to put down new cove molding and everything, so it adds up. It's 11 rooms.
When was
11
Norris
rooms?
built, do you remember?
The
95.
95?
Yeah,
Okay, so
95.
there shouldn't be any asbestos under the tile, or under the
No,
carpet
not
for
in
glue?
the glue and stuff, I don't
Right.
believe so.
Oh, good, okay.
And then if you've visited Norris in the last few years, you would notice that the concrete outside is terrible. And we did spend some money a few years ago to have it patched. Well, it looks worse now than it did before, because that's what happens when you patch the concrete, and the water gets in there, and then it freezes, and then it expands. So that was also referred to capital committee.
And we,
One question here.
Sure.
All the way back to last meeting. Erin had some pictures of some door jams that
Right.
were pretty much rusted right through. They're not on this list. She said she was gonna go to capital on that?
Yeah,
That's all.
Go ahead.
There's been no capital meeting, so I've been waiting to hear about a capital meeting. There's been nothing
no,
that I've
and
been.
I'm working on that. I did reach out to the chair and haven't heard back yet, but I'm on that committee, so
Yeah, we'll wait,
We
we'll
gotta have a
definitely,
So you're gonna
yeah,
put those.
that will be
doors on
added,
this
yeah,
one.
because,
Those are pretty awful
Yeah.
pictures.
now, did you folks prioritize all this stuff? Because I know,
These are the priorities, including the doors. I think that the doors, we didn't put here because they were going to the green,
We were
trying
trying.
to get money from the green energy money.
Some of those
So
are,
now it should go on here, but it is on my regular capital plan prioritized
Yeah.
as
yeah,
well.
we gotta make sure all of them get on for next year.
Yeah, and I think that we picked the worst ones with a price because they all need to be
They're
replaced.
kind of beyond
But there
repair.
are some that are beyond repair.
Yeah.
The doors are gonna be expensive.
And I'd also
Yeah.
like to take the opportunity to compliment them, because while I sent out a request to do a 5-year capital plan, Erin sent me back the other day a 6-year capital plan for North School. And it's done very well, so
She's an
thank you
overachiever.
very much.
That's great. So, do we have any,
So, yeah, just on the timing of the capital requests when they came in.
Thanks, Tom.
There's an opportunity. There was sort of a belief that, that some of the doors could be patched, and we were waiting to see, and there was an understanding that there was potentially some green grant money that might come in to be able to do that. So we sort of put it off, and that is actually, I've kind of popped it out to the next couple years. So, you know, if you'd like it on this year's, I can throw in a new form for it, but if it's not too late, but.
yeah, I don't think you
we
can
had kinda
repair
thought-
any of those.
Hmm?
I don't think you can repair any of those doors. Those are all,
I thought there was an understanding.
I mean, the doors look like they were all
There are some, John, that are
a repair.
bad,
Yeah,
but they're so
Preschool
expensive.
preschool one was terrible looking.
The preschool, coming in from the front of the preschool, it's not only the doors, what the sketchy part is the jams, the
Right.
steel encasements that are coming up.
Yeah.
Some of them are,
Yeah, right there. Those are the pictures from last.
some are completely rotted out, about 12 inches up. And it's, that would, if push came to shove, you could have a welder come in and you could fabricate.
Cut it
to-
and,
to-
yeah.
to- Because there's windows that go out beyond that, and now you're talking even a more major expense. The expenses we've got are for replacing the doors and looking at possibly having somebody come in and fabricate some of those jams that are holding the doors in, as opposed to replacing those. Because if you start to replace those, it's gonna be really, really expensive.
Yeah.
But, I mean, at some point, they may not be able to be repaired.
now you just got an estimate on that, correct?
I actually got an estimate from the original people that installed the doors for
Okay.
the school in '95.
So if we did
They're
a
still
bid,
around.
hopefully we'd get some good prices, but.
Yes, everything that was done on that capital plan was with the understanding that if the school approves it, we're gonna go back and we're gonna get competitive bidding on
Right.
all of these. These were just to give, I was very clear, I need ballpark costs going forward to do all of these things, with the assumption that we would get more detailed if
Okay.
there's a go-ahead.
Did they include prevailing wage?
Yes, these
So
are all
we're set
prevailing
on that?
wages. Yep.
Good. Okay, great. Thank you. So do we have any other questions up here for the folks, any of the folks that came to the podium, or if we want to drag somebody else up, I'm sure they'd be willing to come.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask Hampshire Region, just the question of, I guess, the principal and the superintendent. We had a presentation from Smith Vocational here a few weeks ago, and I was shocked that only 20% of the students at Smith are Northampton residents, and 80% come from all of the outlying districts. Now, my question is, as we're going through, you know, every number and having discussions about programs and services, the fact that we, I think collectively in the surrounding area, make up 80% of the population of that school, do we have any voice? And if we don't, would that be something we should be talking, not Southampton alone, I'm talking about it like an advisory council to Smith comprised of sending school district representatives, so that maybe we could have some influence there, the way we're talking here about cost savings and programming and things that are in the interest of each of these individual school districts who are sending students there.
Definitely. Last year, Dr. Jorgensen and I were part of a analysis task force group that had vocational schools as well as public schools. And I don't think that a lot of public schools or towns are aware of that disparity. We were the only public school that participated. It was all vocational schools, and they like their autonomy. So I think that is definitely something that we should start talking to towns about, because they set their own tuition rate.
But I mean, that becomes it. I mean.
Exactly.
Exactly. It puts us at an extreme disadvantage because it's the only game in town, essentially. That's the only place people can go. And we have no way of influencing some of their thinking or their decision-making. Not only just about programming, but about costs.
Right.
So
If
let-
there was
let
more
me ask-
competition with Westfield, it would
Yeah.
probably drive costs down.
True.
So I was going to say, because we choose the Voc school that we're going to send folks to, does Westfield have the same depth of programs that Smith does?
From my understanding, we choose to transport students to Smith Voc. So
Right.
students can choose to go to Westfield, and they have comparable programs. Smith has a agricultural program that Westfield doesn't have, but Westfield also has some other programs that
I
Smith
guess,
doesn't
what I'm
have.
saying, because you say we don't have any leverage, but could we have leverage if we said, we're going to decide to go to Westfield instead of Smith, and, use that as negotiating with Smith?
I don't want to, put any student at a disadvantage,
Oh,
that
no,
they shouldn't
no.
go to the one that best meets their needs. But I'm just saying, having some
Yeah.
conversations with
Right.
them, some
But it is
interaction with
interesting
them.
that students can choice to any public high school, but students can't choice to public vocational school. So it's definitely something to
Well, I
discuss.
thought they could. I thought the only difference was the transportation.
Exactly.
the only
Transportation wouldn't be provided.
So
correct.
if kids choice out to, I don't know, East Hampton, do we have to transport them?
No,
No.
Okay, so it's the same rule,
no, it's not,
no?
right?
We don't have to
No.
transport to Voc or to choice out, correct?
But we
We
transferred to Voc.
transport to Smith Voc.
Correct.
Smith Voc.
Right, no, but I
that's-
mean
Because
in
we have an
general.
agreement, the district has an agreement with Smith Voc to transport there.
Right, but they can go to any Voc school they want, we're just not transporting them.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Correct.
okay,
But it's definitely something worth discussion.
yeah. Now, Mike Kaling was here, he's the chair, I guess, the board of Smith, so I think he was more than willing to have conversations with us, so we should set something up, yeah.
And I need to know from you folks if you think it's valuable and doable. It's not to add more work to people, it's really to achieve a better outcome for,
We've never had a conversation, so it can't hurt.
I think it would be in the best interest of towns, because the Hampshire Regional doesn't pay the vocational
I know,
schools,
it's the
it's
town,
the town.
yeah.
So I
Right.
really feel
Right.
like
So
it's a
I think we should set it up, and we can ask the other
no, but
towns.
since
Do
they're
the
high
other-
school age students, that
Right.
was why
And I think that's why other,
talk to you
other
guys.
schools didn't participate in this task force, because they don't really have like a vested interest, but we all should, because it certainly impacts the budget overall.
That's what I was gonna ask, do the other towns send anybody to Smith, or is it just us?
I'm sorry, the other towns in our district?
Yeah,
Yes, quite a bit.
okay, so everybody should be involved then,
That's, yeah.
okay. So, anybody up here have any questions for those folks before we entertain the public? Jim, I think you wanted to talk?
Yeah, Jim Palermo, Glendale Road. This is as a citizen of Southampton, not as a school committee member. The state is imposing an incredible amount of unreimbursed mandates on the school. And, I'm amazed at what our schools do, and I'm so proud to be part of the system. But the problem is the state is not giving us the money we need. Transportation is only one small thing. I read one article that said there's up to 500 unfunded mandates, many of them affiliated with standardized testing and everything that's involved there. The idea that, for example, a few years back, Norris had to go out and buy computers so the state could give MCAS on computers. Well, that's an unfunded mandate. And I think that with the current crop of new people that we have in Boston as our elected representatives, I think there's many welcoming ears that we can appeal to. And I think that as a town, we should maybe even reach out to other communities and really put pressure on our elected officials. My abstinence in the last budget election was the frustration that the schools are being asked to do more and more and more and more without, and the state just keeps dumping on us, and something's got to be done. So as a taxpayer, as a member of this community, realizing the strain that we have trying to get overrides, and that there is a limit to how much property tax people are willing to pay, that we have to look at more progressive ways of getting money. So I urge us to become very aggressive in contacting our state officials.
Yeah, I think what we were saying for the schools, they've got to be creative, but we've got to be more creative in getting more funding.
We have to be assertive. I mean, you know, how the state can say they balanced the budget and at the same time way underfund
A massive
education.
surplus, by the way, but,
Pardon?
with a massive surplus, by the way.
Yeah, with a massive surplus. Where's I forgot the section of the law, but by law, they're supposed to fund every mandate they impose on the school system as long as funds are available. Well, if they have a huge reserve fund, they've got funds available.
Well, that's a rainy day fund, they can't use it.
Oh, I see,
yeah.
okay. But I'm
So
sorry,
Jim, to your point, so we hear this loud and clear at this meeting, that I think one of my concerns is that these types of meetings aren't happening at every single town, and so I just want to task the school committee members that are here for both, you know, obviously we've got it covered on this board from a Southampton perspective with our you know, legislature and Senate personnel for the state, but like if you're a member, I don't know, I'm not sure of everybody who's here, but when you go back to your school committees that include, you know, Hampshire Regional with all of the other members for the other neighboring towns, they should be going back to their individual select boards, and we should be, you know, for lack of a better way to put it, ganging up and putting pressure on, and the more people that do this and the more majorities and the more towns, the more voices that get heard and the squeaky wheel gets the grease. So like, we can say all we want, but like, this should come up in committee as well.
Well, Carol and I just recently attended a conference at the Mass Association of School Committees. And the superintendent from Springfield, for example, said that charter schools are costing Springfield $55 million a year. And yet we have elected officials who want to expand charter schools and want to really privatize public education. My opinion as a private citizen, and everybody just sits there and goes, oh.
It's taxation without representation.
It is, you know, but, you know, I'm old, I can be a curmudgeon. Thank you.
Can I speak to that really quickly? Sorry.
Sure.
We met in Williamsburg, the principal, myself, and their finance committee and their select board, and they were also talking about charter schools and how charter school teachers don't need to be certified. They don't need to accept special education students. They don't need to pay as much for transportation. So one thing that they thought to do that wouldn't cost the town money would be to advocate with their state representative, who's Senator Hines, is to require charter schools to have the same expectations that public schools do, because it just seems fair. So one of their slogans is to equal or level the playing field. So I think that if that's something that everyone can adopt, that would be really powerful, because of course they don't have as much cost and they can set their tuition at a higher rate. So it's just something that I think would be effective.
Thanks. Is there anybody else from the public that wants to ask any questions or put any comments in? No? Is there any other, so nobody has any other topics on this particular, or questions on this particular topic? Is there any other topic that anybody wants to come up from the public to speak about? We'll have open public time. Everybody's tired and wants to go home?
John, can I just ask a question about the Capitol? After the Norris people mentioned about the Capitol.
Yep.
What's the timetable? I know, Matt, you're the representative to the Capitol Committee, but, I mean, we have a town meeting coming up. We're not addressing Capitol unless there was like an emergency. Basically, that's more of an annual town meeting event. What's the timetable between now and the annual town meeting for addressing any capital request?
It would take us to, I would say, probably beginning of April.
Okay.
And actually, I will say this, is that at least for Norris School, they've got a number of projects that, that really does need to get taken care of. Perhaps we take a look at bundling a lot of that together and actually do a borrowing on it.
Yeah, we have a lot, so
Yeah.
we're not gonna have enough money to cover it out of our
Right.
our reserve. So I think this was a great beginning conversation, and it's just a beginning conversation. It's up to us to continue it. So we're going to send out some emails, Bobby, to you on some other questions, and we'll keep in contact. But I look forward to getting a lot of emails and hopefully some meetings from us. And if you have any questions, feel free to bring them in. So thank you very much. We
Thank
appreciate it.
you very much for coming.
Hey, Jim, how are you? Haven't seen you.
I'm well. How are you?
Good.
How are the kids?
Kids are doing good. Good.
Yeah. Nice to see you.
You too.